I grew up in the middle of the Civil War. We've been fighting in the north of Ireland for a number of years, well, hundreds of years. But in 1969, when I was born, they broke out into a civil war. So from when I was a child, that's all I knew. All I knew was the wickedness of man, killing one another, maiming one another, terrorizing one another. They had all kinds of evil to one another. And all of it was motivated by hatred. And that's one of the things I remember the most, was the bone-deep hearts consumed by hatred for one another. It took 30 years for that civil war to calm down, and they still harbor hatred in their hearts to one another. But I remember that 30 years, and I remember that none of it was glorious, none of it was wonderful, none of it was exemplary. It was horrendous. It was only glorious in the minds of those who were perpetuating hatred towards one another, hatred towards their brothers in their hearts. And I realized that people are easy to hate. They're hard to love, but they're easy to hate. And I recognized, as I've lived in the United States of America, and I can't remember where the tipping point was. When I first arrived here, there was political differences in the country. People disagreed with one another. They would argue with one another at times. But slowly I saw the same hatred sprout up in the hearts of both sides as I had seen in the north of Ireland. I've seen this hatred growing in this country, and now there's talk, serious talk of civil war. And all of this pointless, destructive wickedness is not something that we want as Christians. There's nothing glorious in that. What we imagine that might be is not what it will be. It'll be a horror show. And one of the sad things is that all of this could be avoided if we would listen to Jesus Christ. In Matthew 5:21, he addresses the hatred. He says that you have heard, this is Matthew 5:21, that you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of the hellfire. Talking about this hatred of our brother in our heart that starts in the heart and comes out of the mouth. Then he goes on to say, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift therefore before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge. The judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. But surely I say to you, by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny. Verse 21 through 22 is Jesus laying down the problem. Verse 23 through verse 26 is the solution to that problem. Now the problem is hatred in the heart for our brother. Now, the majority of Jews, it seemed at this time in history, were all about their outward, personal observance of the law. They had counted 613 commandments from the law and the prophets, and They were seeking to act these out. This was their life's work to fulfill these commandments. And they had in their minds an attitude of, you can hate your brother. You just can't put your hands on him. That kind of way of thinking. And nothing has changed with that religion today. Judaism is an outward, works-based, performing religion. Today, for the Jew, at certain times of the year, it's sinful for him to even flick a light switch on. But he can hire a Gentile to do it for him. And that's just some of the religious nonsense that carries on within this country. And it doesn't stop there. The idea that religion is all about following rules and regulations, not doing the wrong, is where the problem starts. It seemed like the person that Jesus was talking about in verse 21 through 22 had some kind of progressive anger with his brother. It seems that initially he remained silent. He was angry with him. But then he starts to come out of his mouth. He starts to abuse him, calling him Raka. And I don't know if that was in private or in public. But you see how this is progressing with him. This hatred and this anger is bearing fruit in his heart until the point where he ups the ante to say, you fool, you worthless waste of space. It's not worth even having you here, is what he's saying. And of course, that's where murder comes in. Now, did he say that to him privately or to her privately? Or was he saying this in public to others? Because at times, we tend to want to do that. Not only do I dislike the guy, not only do I mistreat the guy, but I want to tell everybody else how worthless he or she is. This person Jesus is talking about erased the individual they hated in their heart. And the next thing, though from word there would be deed, erasing them by murder. And this is the same attitude in this country today. And it's wicked. It's wicked to look at people this way. Those who are disciples of Christ are to be peacemakers. They're not to have a list of people that they hate and would be happier if they were dead. It's wrong. But Jesus didn't leave us in this situation with showing us the problem. He shows us the solution in verse 23 through 26. And it's interesting that the onus here is on the abuser to reconcile with the one they have abused. And he mentions if you're on your way to the altar, he's talking to religious people here. There's no greater haters and murderers in their hearts than the religious. In fact, some of those Jesus were talking to would have been handing him over to Pilate to be murdered at a later date. But he says to them, when you're on your way to the altar, why are they going to the altar? Well, they're going to worship God, don't you see? He says, while you're on your way to the altar, you better think it through. If someone holds anything against you and you're guilty, and be reconciled with them. And he's saying, you better get it done, or God is going to get it done in you. Jesus is not saying here, don't hate people. He's not saying stop doing bad things. This is not a bad things advice. This is from Jesus, who says if you're guilty, be proactive in fixing the problem. Go see him or her before he or her brings the issue before God. And he starts handing out discipline. And he comes to see you or comes to see me. Someone says, well, I don't feel comfortable with that. Listen, you'll feel a lot worse if God throws you into his divine jail. That's what he's talking about here. We have an idea in this country today that God is concerned with our following his rules. Some people believe it's about balancing our moral account book. That's not what he's focused on our outward life. It's our inner life. And he's serious. He's serious about it. Christ goes to the internal man. The attitude that we have towards one another within our hearts. Not to observing the law from out with ourselves, but within ourselves, within the heart, to love the Lord or God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, and love one another as Christ has loved us. But why does God even bother with you, or me, or us as a people? Why does he care about these things as long as we just follow the rules and be good citizens or good people? What's the point of it all? Well, I think it boils down to this. It's not about what I do. It's about who I am as a person. That leads to how I treat people, and it leads to what I do. This is about how we see each other. If we see each other as made in the image of God, as children of God, if we're Christians, or those who are not, that they're made in the image of God, and if these people have value, they're not an extra in my soap opera. The guy who says raka, the guy who says full to his brother, sees him as an expendable extra in his soap opera. If he wasn't there, it wouldn't matter, is the idea. But Christ, and following him, he calls us to value people, regardless of their behaviors, to see value in them. Because it's a matter of who we are and how we treat people that is the core issue with God. It's about togetherness for the Christians. It's about community for the Christians. And for the Christians, they have to take it seriously if their brother or sister has anything against them, that they're proactive. They're proactive in maintaining the unity of the Spirit and the bonds of peace. Too long in this country, there's been theology that revolves around my own spiritual development. And that's not Christ's message. Christ starts with my internal motivation, how I look at and how I treat you, and how we do it together. But why is this loving one another from the heart so important? Why does he value that above everything else? When we lived in Connecticut, we had a beautiful willow tree that was in our yard. Beautiful. I used to look out there, it was the centerpiece of the yard. And a willow tree, when it's doing whatever willow trees do, they look majestic, they look beautiful, they look serene. And I used to like looking at that. I knew that it was having some problems. I knew there was difficulties with it. There being a piece chopped off or something near the base. But what I didn't know is that willow tree had rotted out from the base up through the center. Now, you all know about winds in South Dakota. You know when a storm comes through and the winds are high here, how they can come over sideways like a train coming through your yard, and the sound of it and the power of it. A storm came through Connecticut, very much like you would see winds here up in the 50s and 60s, 70 mile an hour gusts. And I stood in my house, and I still remember the evening it happened. I looked out that window at that willow tree, and the gusts were gusting across. The wind was powerful. It was forceful, and it snapped that tree like a twig. The whole thing came down. It just broke in half. I got my brother Bill Godet. I asked him to come out and help with his chainsaw. And we went out and we chainsawed up that tree, and we burned it in our outside fireplace. And it was so rotten, it didn't even burn very well. In Matthew 5:21 and following, Jesus said, danger, 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 4 times when it comes to what's going on within us, within our hearts. He says, danger, 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 and danger, 4 times in this text. He then talks about the prison twice. He then talks about the judge. If anybody was good at warning people about what's going on within them, it was the Christ. See, God says to us, and Jesus mentions it in the text, there's a hell to pay for hatred and murder. A hell to pay. There's a great storm coming to this world when the Almighty will walk into this world, when Christ himself will put his foot back on this earth and judge all mankind. Now, it's a big storm. It's worse than we can ever imagine. The only ones that will stand are those with a pure and righteous heart. The rest will break. Like that tree in my yard, like that willow tree that looked fine on the outside but was rotten in the middle. That's why he always brings us back to this. That's why he always talks about the attitude of the heart, who talks about the treatment of our brothers and sisters, is because he knows that the storm is coming. And there's only those whose hearts are righteous and just and loving in Christ who are going to stand up on that day. And what will happen to those that break? Well, they're going to burn in hell. They're going to burn for eternity. They're going to get punishment beyond our wildest imagination. Jesus teaches us that. Over and over again, he warned of this judgment that would come. So this is why we must deal with the things that he teaches and take every one of them seriously, especially matters of the heart. But there's good news, brothers and sisters. There's good news for us. We love one another. We're acting in love for one another. We're working at loving one another. We are achieving this love for one another. It's manifest amongst us. It can be seen by others. We're performing acts of love for one another. Not that we might be right before God, but because Christ has made us right before God. Amen. We love one another. We're doing it. And today, we come back to the greatest act of love. When everyone was filled with hate, Christ was filled with love when he went to the cross for us. When he laid his life down for us, his enemies, he brings us back again to love. So we're doing it. Today, as we take this bread and this fruit of the vine, what we're saying is we recommit to do it. We readjust our focus back to the cross. And if any seeds of hatred, if anything influences us towards hating others, we rebuke it. We say no to that. We're going to keep on loving because Christ has loved us. And if anyone we know has anything against us, we're going to go to them before God comes to us because we love them too. The bottom line is, it's not what you do, it's who you are that matters. And that's seen by how we love one another. And the good news is that we do. We do love one another. And Christ brings us back to this love at the supper. Not love for ourselves, but love for even our enemies. He brings us back there again. So as we go into this new week, I strongly encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. You're getting it done. But let's continue to love and to do it more and more. Because there's a day coming. And that great wind is coming. That great storm is coming. And the only thing that's going to stand up is those who love in Christ.